It's stochastic fiction game time. It's time to play a writing game. Writing game that's going to take place within 2 hours, where I will write a story based upon the stochastic fiction outline I'm going to be generating, and then read it at the end. Of course, read it along the way as well to be able to help edit, sound it out, and come up with ideas. This script is a Python script, so let's go ahead and execute that Python script. And it's going to generate an output and outline that we're going to see here. It's a stochastic fiction game outline. We'll open up this outline. We'll read out aloud the elements, and with these elements, within the next 2 hours, create a story, read it, rate it at the end. Let's see what we got here for today's stochastic fiction game story elements. The story elements for today are setting time past, setting main location swamp, conflict person versus nature, quantity of primary characters 2, point of view third, tense past tense, genre dystopian, format flash fiction. Those are the story elements for today's stochastic fiction game. Well, those are story elements that don't bring a smile to my face, especially with a genre dystopian, but that's fine. It's an old hat I can put on and wear for a little bit, and we'll see if we can get ourselves through this and have a story. Maybe at the end, make life feel a little bit less dystopian. It is going to be in a swamp, person versus nature. That's, I guess, kind of good. Setting time in the past, conflict person versus nature, quantity primary characters 2, point of view third, dystopian, in a swamp. In the past, too. So there's no scientific elements that are going to help me create some overlord. I'm trying to think of the dystopian features of this stuff is to me a little bit odd. I always have a little bit of confusion how that works out, especially in the past. Do we live in a dystopia now? Quite potentially. So maybe just highlighting the things that exist in this day and age. The past, any time before now, but if we want to get real, we'd at least go like 10 years. 10 years to show a dystopia in a swamp, too. And person versus nature. Dystopian. Man, it'd be better if it was a romance. And I struggle writing romance. What's the dystopian part about this swamp? It's the person versus nature. Maybe if it's person versus nature, someone gets thrust into a game contest to win money, maybe. I could lift off very popular shows where they pit two people against each other. They're both in the desert, but that's not really person versus nature. You're going to conflict with nature's elements, of course, within that story, but the main conflict, I would think, would be person versus society or person versus person. If you have some sort of contest, it's dystopian, though. I mean, it really is. People's chances at riches of humiliating themselves and potentially dying for the chance of a few minutes of fame and some cash, just so they can make it along in life and feel like they've succeeded. Seems pretty dystopian to me, but to others it seems pretty successful. Swamp, person versus nature, dystopian. Those are the things that I'm, of course, hung up on because of those things that will alter the story more than anything else. If it was the future, I could probably throw in a little bit of science fiction. Even though it's not the genre science fiction, most stories do take place dystopian in the future because it's easier to assume some overlord than it is to take some thing of the past and make it dystopian. I'm going to go ahead and make our current society we live in dystopian, well, of the past. In a swamp, though, I visited swamps in my life, so I can have some nonfiction to create the fiction, the lie that's needed for the story, but I don't. Why are they there? And if it's dystopian, then maybe maybe it's let's say like the chain gangs were pretty dystopian. You could do that. Like I've never been in a chain gang, and while they don't necessarily have chain gangs anymore, to the extreme, they still, pay prisoners to fight fires and pay them next to nothing. And I'm sure labor camps are coming soon to this country, at least, with the suspected illegal immigrants that come in here as labeled by the government. I think the next step is, well, the current step is concentration camps. The step after that would be go ahead and go work the fields for free, or they'll take the prisoners in these private prisons to make them do the farm work labor that the immigrants are no longer doing. So let's go chain gang. I like that. It could just definitely the past. I could even do firefighting. It'd be more popular and touch base with the realities of now, and it happens before this time now. I mean, it happened with the last California fires, and they probably happened with the previous California fires, and will happen with the next California fires. They'll have a bunch of underpaid prisoners out there risking their lives for a chance to earn pennies on the dollar. Maybe they'll get interviewed and you'll get some happy posts on social media about how they're doing right, which doesn't put money in the pocket and secure your future existence in the United States of America. We're getting dystopian. Let's keep going at it. I think I'm going to do it. Firefighting. I think people can relate more than that than a bunch of prisoners building the road. How to start it out. Let's not have it about any current fires. Hell, even if I could, I wouldn't be able to cite it. I didn't experience it. I've read it in the news. The next tragedy is among us, so we might as well focus on that. Don't have to see it daily, so there's that too. And there's two people. It could be like one dies. Maybe a tree falls on them. I read something recently about the need to go back through some of these forests and find smoking trees that are burning from the inside. It's pretty crazy. You overlook them days later, they're still burning, and then they fall over and the fire spreads again. I suppose in this story there could be two people. Maybe there's that's another thing I have never worked with prisoners to help put out a fire. Therefore, I'm really not too familiar with structurally how you would contain that, because you'd have to give them some sort of free movement. You'd have to have some sort of trust too. So we'll start it with maybe it falls on them and explodes. I'll gender role this because I see mostly, in my experience at least, male firefighters and not female firefighters. I'm sure there's a little bit of biasness towards that, and I'm not saying it's never happened, but most media I've read and seen ever about prisoners who are fighting fires, they've been gendered male, so we're going to go with at least both characters are going to be from a male prison. I don't know if one's going to be a security guard right now. I feel like it wouldn't be dystopian. It will be dystopian. I don't think the security or police officers going to care. Maybe that's the dystopian part about it. The person's going to die, a tree's going to fall on them. The guard's not going to do shit. Maybe they'll be friendly with them the whole time. And in the end, it's just like, yeah, just a prisoner. Who cares? It would work too a little bit with immigrants deemed illegal by the United States entering the country, but that would be a little bit more awkward because you'd probably likely have them more in tune to run. I'm not saying that the prisoners couldn't run, but I feel they're not as adept to it. And there's probably, when you have a prisoner that's been convicted of a crime versus a immigrant that's deemed illegal and forced to work. Let's not get into that. It's all dystopia. We're getting there. We're building up this dystopian world. So we got someone. Fire burns. Fire burns in the trees. Fire can burn in trees far longer. I don't know if that's a good opening sentence, but at least have some sort of conflict and brings one into the scene, I think. But it doesn't really introduce the character as fast as I'd like to. We got to have two. Definitely can have one being the security, sheriff, something, prison guard, and then a prisoner. The prisoner is going to be the one doing the work. And I guess inspection work too, and maybe they hit on a tree. I think some of these can explode too. I feel like maybe that's like a pop culture thing. But it would make sense if you had something burning inside. It could build up a certain amount of pressure if it wasn't able to release that pressure. Though that's a bunch of physics I don't want to get into, but would be the tragedy. So they're walking through the forest. I wish I knew. Let me think of do something overarching and wonderful like the Glen Canyon. I'm just gonna let's put this in a place I at least kind of know has fires. Leaving smoldering. We want past, right? Yeah. Smoldering. Oh, man, that just sucks too. I need something poppier, something more happening. We have a fire. It's definitely, that's gonna be the dystopia. It also has to be in a swamp. Fudge. That's a little bit more difficult. Fire through a swamp. There goes my fire story. I should look at these story elements before I come up with something and go off on a tangent. I mean, swamps can burn, but it's really hard for a swamp to burn. Trees are sponges. Fudge. There's the chase scene. It could be a chain gang still. That's very dystopian in reality in the past. And they're making a road through the swamp. Let's just do that. I've seen enough movies with chain gangs. Honestly, one coming to mind right now is what Cool Hand Luke, the very famous one. Paul Newman, I believe, was the main star. Was Luke, if I recall. So we'll do chain gangs. That will fit the dystopian because chain gangs are very dystopian. Having a bunch of slave laborists also have to work to make the prison money or the owner's money is kind of dystopian. Two primary characters. We're going to have the security guard. We're going to be given the chase. I'm not going to say what this person was guilty or had a crime of, maybe. We'll see what it goes. I only have 600, 800 words for a flash fiction story, so we'll see how many of those words can get spent on telling a good story, and hopefully it does good. Let's start with the action. And it's got to be, third person? So omniscient. We'll try past tense. Flash fiction in a swamp. I don't I've been in swamps before. Not like Louisiana Bayou swamp or anything like that. Florida Everglades, no. Seen pictures. I feel like a swamp's a perfect place for a bunch of people to be putting down a gravel road. Someone's got to buy that swampland for cheap. Have a bunch of cheap labor, terraform it for them. Let's just do it typical also, so both gendered male still, because at least all the media I've ever read, fiction, nonfiction, seen, heard, it's always like male chain gangs. So it's not necessarily out of the norm just to label all the characters. The two primary characters will be male: security guard, chain gang, digger. I believe mostly road work of what I've seen in movies, so let's go there. Let's start with the chase, the shackles. What was that one movie with Val Kilmer too? The Man Who Broke 1,000 Chains. Remember that one? The chain gang. And it's usually, I think a lot of times they were putting in railroad too. The sledgehammer. That way you could have we can at least set it up of how they're going to get the... The shackle. Did bend pretty good. Do I need to use the word Bob? No, because I need another name. Chuck. The shackle did bend pretty good after Chuck. And we want like the ankle shackle, so we can at least show where it is. And not shackled. Shackle? Shackle? Is it shackle? Let's go ahead and look at the search and return engine. Search and return engine might have what I want to spell shackle. Shack Ellie? Yes. That makes sense now. Shackle. The shackle did bend pretty good after Chuck slammed it. With the sledgehammer. Against the railroad. It's a railroad, rod, railroad. What's part of a railroad track? The railroad track. Sweat stung his eyes as he looked around. Lines him in. Slamming sledgehammers. Slamming railroad ties. I think that works. If whatever working means in this day and age, it's a thing. So the shackle did bend pretty good after Chuck slammed it with a sledgehammer against the railroad track, the rail track. Sweat stung his eyes as he looked around, the lines of men slamming railroad ties. The lines of men in prison stripes, slamming railroad ties. Now I'm lost at words a little bit. The Shackle did bend pretty good. By the fifth hit. Chuck got excited. He didn't cripple himself. Person versus nature, though. Damn it, not person versus person. Fudge. That ain't gonna work. This is not about nature. This is about like the dystopian society. It sets up the dystopia. And maybe they don't chase him. Maybe they just let him go. Because they know that, where you going to go? You run off into the swamp. Good luck. Excuse me. So the Shackle did print. Let's keep with it. So I need like a paragraph by the fifth hit. And prison strips. I need an E on that. The lines of man in prison stripes slamming railroad ties along the path through. I just need a swamp, some sort of swamp name that seems like a swamp name. Put this in Louisiana. I think they had the most chain gangs, in at least my pop culture existence in the United States. A wetland bayou. Let's just call it the bayou. Like I'm from there. I am absolutely not. Why would you put a railroad track? Well, money. That's why. The edge of the bayou. Path carved through the edge of the bayou. And you got money, right? You don't have to be smart with it. As long as you can spend it to say you're doing a thing. Slave labor is cheap too. So technically not slave labor, but damn near close. There's the bayou. By the fifth hit. Chuck seen who? Seen someone? This is dystopian. I don't know if this hits the dystopian mark. It could be more action, but it sure seems dystopian. Other people will probably just find this to be a... Yeah. The trouble I always have with dystopia, they get played up so much in science fiction that it makes it so obvious. The good, the evil, the dystopian. The shackle did bend pretty good after Chuck slammed it with a sledgehammer against the rail track, sweat-stung eyes, and he looked around the lines of men in prison stripes slamming railroad ties along the path carved through the edge of the bayou. By the fifth hit, Chuck seen prison guard. By the name of Chuck. By the name of Lewis. Appear from a distance and pivot around toward. By the fifth hit, Chuck, seeing the prison guard by the name Louis peer from a distance, pivot toward him. Feeling Chuck pressed against the pain of the shackled cutting foot. And ran off. Oh, he realized he left his shoe behind. Off into the swamp. Swamp he splashed. Not caring much about the sound. Knowing those dogs. Mostly chunky. Got no love, no want to get wet and it's mire, right? The quagmire. Mire, stenchy, swampy, boggy ground. Wet mire. He lost his other shoe. By the mouth of the mire. Sucking his feet. Feet like catfish. Trying to eat a fist. Sucking his feet like a catfish. Chuck lost his other shoe. I think they got catfish there. I mean, I've had catfish before. They're very fatty and they're really trash fish. They're good. Just don't think about what they eat and you'll be fine. Chuck lost his other shoe. By the mouth. Okay, so let's read this to see if at least gives a story. Who knows? Off into the swamp. Let's put another of into the swamp. Of into the swamp. So Chuck pressed against the pain of the shackled cutting foot and ran off before he realized he left the other shoe behind. He left his shoe behind. Off into the swamp he splashed and waited, not caring much about sound. Knowing those dog and the chunky security guards got guards. Those dogs and the chunky security guards not wanting to get wet. Wet and stuck in mire. Chuck lost his other shoe by the mouth of the mire, sucking his feet like a catfish. Gunshot fired. Fired. I don't know if this actually has two right now. I mean, the two primary characters, I suppose. You have the antagonist, protagonist right here. You don't have this lone individual going into. So Lewis does serve a purpose, and therefore is a little bit better, is maybe within the boundaries of the outline. Past, yeah. Swamp, yes. Person versus nature, soon to be. Right now it's person versus person, person versus society. But the nature starts right now in the story. Two primary characters, Lewis and Chuck. Third person so far. Past tense, a little bit. Dystopian, sure. Chain gangs, they're dystopian. You know. Forced prison labor. Or at least cheaply paid. Cheap labor. It's easier to convince. It's better to convince. There's more money to be made the more people you commit into prison. It would be the first time there's been a judge on the take from some company for prison labor and the amount of money the private company actually gets for housing prisoners in trash locations. Off into the swamp, she splashed and waited, not caring much about sound. Off into the swamp, she splashed and waited, not caring much about the sound, knowing those dogs and the chunky security guards were not wanting to get wet, stuck in mire. Chuck lost his other shoe by the mouth of the mire, sucking his feet like catfish. Water up to his chest. He spied a mound of muck rise. What kind of, like, cypress? Like, I can't. Like, types of swamp trees. Cypress is one of them, right? Red maple, elm. Cypress trees. Yeah, cypress. A mucka mound. He spied a mucka mound around a crop of cypress trees. Cypress trees. A gunshot fired and Louise shouted. The guard Louis. A gunshot fired and the guard Louis shouted. Yeah, I mean, so I got flash fiction. I got the setup. I mean, I got an hour and 26 minutes. Let's see if it really takes that long. How does this end? It's dystopian. It ends in getting captured or killed. Duh. Yeah, I suppose. Gunshot fired and the guard Louis shouted. Good luck. A gunshot fired and the guard shouted, good luck. Let's put a big capital. Good luck, Chuck. We'll get you. Yeah. All right. Chuck grabbed onto that. Chuck climbed that. That mound of muck. Sat muddy and soaked. Looking at his bare feet. Looking as his bare feet. Let's go there. Climb that muck mound, sat down on that. Sticks. What kind of other things are there? Like swamp trees in the bayou. Yeah, okay. That's good. So Chuck climbed that mound of muck and sat muddy and soaked, looking at his bare feet. All around. Trees and water. Spread with spots of mud. Small ripples. Fish, snakes, or something like, what is it, alligators or crocodiles? Alligators. It is a big maw. Inspired Chuck. The day passed, the night. A helicopter passed overhead. Okay. Now I gotta hasten time. I want to increase this place to show to the end. So I need like a paragraph that summarizes it. We got him loose. We don't care what this person's guilty of. They're a prisoner. Whether they're guilty or not, that's more than a flash fiction story. Unless it was a flash fiction story about like the punishment, then you would bring it up. But I want just a prisoner, and that's enough context that I think most people would give any person with the label prisoner upon them. They would not hear much after that. So in this case, let's just keep it prisoner. Don't get into backstory. We don't have time, but we do have Chuck here. Or the swamp well. What does pass time? Into a ball. He held that ball. Ball. The sun lowered. After a helicopter passed overhead. After the noon heat passed and sweat and swamp wet, how to get cool. And the hunger, that set in. To didn't much miss. I don't know, the oatmeal and no, they wouldn't give him asparagus. What's cheap? Oatmeal and onions. Night came fast. His plans. It's cold and the pain. And the feet pain. A few cuts. Branch stabs. Burned a bit. We'll Chuck try to figure what to do next. He planned to make it through the swamp. Out the other side. But you don't know what the other side is. So he slept the night. Next day with the sun. He waded deeper into the swamp. One time, helicopter putted overhead. He ducked behind. So that was the only time. He forgot about his hunger. I realized he couldn't feel his feet. But he still waded deep. But then spotted the ripple in the water. In the eyes. Where are we at here? All right, we escaped chain gang. We're in the swamp. It's definitely conflict versus society, but now we're in nature, so we at least have the conflict versus nature. Dystopia. Yeah, I mean, I think chain gangs are a sign of dystopia. It's like the another way. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be punished, but even people in prison deserve to get paid wages and not be used as some way to be able to get cheap labor, thereby decreasing the likelihood of a decent paying job for somebody else. If you're don't think a criminal deserves it, then don't pay him anything and don't have him do the work. But if you have him do the work, pay him a wage and then justify why you have that prisoner working versus you have them working because it's cheap. They will be the new labor in our society coming soon. Private prisons loaning out and selling out their prisoners for farm work. It was person versus society. I'd go that route a little bit deeper, but this is person versus nature, and the nature now is Chuck in a swamp. Like, what's the real resolution here? This is like not a great story. And not just because it's dystopian and I only really have experienced this thing through media in a very non-fictional way, depicted different ways through media. So my story is a little bit flat and bland. But let's try to at least polish it a little bit. So at least when they read it soon. How does it end? It's dystopia, you gotta die. No, it's not dystopia, you don't die. But he still waded deep into the swamp, but spotted the ripple. That ripple he spotted shook him. The eyes of an alligator. Caused him splash and climb tree. Alligator circled a bit. Under the roots, cypress, and hold. His hunger didn't wait. And his numb feet started reminding him. Started painting it again. As they slipped and rubbed, scraped against the bark. I know cypress, I think the barks I've seen are smoother than your typical like pine tree, but still it's not smooth like glass. You're on it long enough, you scrape yourself. At least I would. I suppose if you have thick calloused feet, which Chuck doesn't. Yeah, I didn't think too far. But I think to just go back. Maybe they go back and they die. I mean, that'd be the true dystopian, right? Try to escape your prison, realize you can't escape, give yourself up. But maybe. And then in the process of giving yourself up, you get attacked by an alligator. I'm showing it, so it's got to come about. Another day passed. Thirst more than hunger. Thought through his mind. Try to cup some of his salty sweat. But that didn't help. Midday. Midday, he drinks some swamp water and gagged. Coughed. That cough echoed. But he heard nothing else. Seen a few ripples before night. More like snakes. Maybe a fish. The chill set in. Before he found sleep. For a few hours. Is it loons? I think they're like bayou loons. Because there's no beaches. And so maybe common loon. I think they're... Yes. We're just going to say... Well and Yodel. We're going to say there's loons here. Whether that's accurate in reality, in my dystopia it is. The chill set in before a few hours before sleep. What is it? The yodel and what? The yodel and well. Yodel and wells. Yodels and wells. The loons. Yodel. Yodels and wells. All through the swamp. Has unseen splashes here and there. Ripple through silence. Chuck got some sleep sometime near morning. Was able to keep it, most because the hunger set in. Hunger and dehydration. Ooh, wait, yeah, I mean, that's like, you can get, what am I thinking of here? Hypothermia. Swamp. So you can get hypothermia in the swamp. And it would definitely be something that's going to hit him here. I don't know. He started shaking. It would be like that's, I've been around someone that had hypothermia from the cold. And I don't know if hypothermia is necessarily the right thing. I think hypothermia is the right word that would happen. She started. Mostly hunger and dehydration. Keep asleep. Noon sun woke him. Sweating and shivering. Mind processing death. And you become stupid. You don't think much. Mind convinced he needed to go back or deeper. He can make it, he thought. Maybe they moved along. And that if he just waited back, walk along that path, and maybe hitch a ride. The plan played out perfect. Sweat drip, more sweat seep from his body. And the hunger numbed. He's seen it. Him waiting. Him finding the road. The guard's gone. After a few days, then he asked himself, how many days has it been? Lost in the count. And hazy in the mind. Between shivers. Some passed a bit. Near dusk, he thought maybe. He knew He believed the time was right for his plan. His splash quieted the loons, beginning their call, their night calls. I'm just making assumptions of things that I've read quickly, and I've lived near a swamp once, and I've heard loons. They're creepy. At least the ones that I was told were loons. Really creepy. His splash quieted the loons. Sudden ripples and slapping alligator tails. Sounded around. In the dim moonlight. He waited, thinking over and over. I don't make it. Getting closer. All right, so how far do I have him go? And be free. Thought he seen a house light or something through the trees. So pushed, thrashed, and slapped through the waist-deep water. Feeling a few thorns stab his feet. As an occasional ripple of he thought he'd seen a house or something through trees, so he thrashed and slapped through the waist-deep water, feeling a few thorns stab his feet and catch occasional ripple of cold. But that light never got brighter. It must have been some root that he tripped over. Maybe you find out at the end what he did. What was the what would make it bad? What would make it seem like it's not as bad? I think it'd be murder. Yeah, it ain't gonna be murder. It's gonna be something like what's the crime? I can't think of the crime. There's got to be a crime that's not terrible. I mean, most criminals tripped over. And I got to think of something if I want to make this sort of back when chain gangs were a thing. Maybe they just like robbed a liquor store. Some route that tripped over. Okay, he thought. He thought about wanting that whiskey. He tried to steal. They got him stuck here. Stuck in the chain gang. And working for life. Working for less than a free man. Working for pennies. Pennies? How do you spell pennies? Pennies. Jeez, I don't spell that word enough. Working for pennies. To make another $1. So they could buy that whiskey. So we'll at least get into why they're there right then. Must have been some route tripped over. There's supposed to be 2 characters. But once his body fell. Hit a rock. He never made it to the light. The light that got brighter. Brighter from a boat. Floating with a paddle. They wouldn't use a motor. They'd go at night. They're still looking. Floating along. With a lantern. Let's just put in a lantern. Let's just put Lewis back in this. What's that? That the guard's name? Maybe it works out. Guard Lewis. Yes, that's the name. Louis. I wish I knew how to spell Lewis. Floating along with Lewis. The guard Lewis. The light got brighter from the boat floating. A lot brighter. The light got brighter. And shone from a lantern. Held by the guard Lewis. Trolling through the swamp. Guard Lewis spit. Well, Ah, it's done. I gotta think of a name. Well, that's it. Let's read this aloud. Let's see how it goes. There's time left, but I think the story's where it's at. On the boat. I'll get overtime. What did I call it? Shackled Labor? Sure. Well, let's go ahead and read these story elements. I hope I got it past tense. I got climbed, mound, held. I think I got it. Hunger. Past tense, dystopian. Yeah, I would say it's dystopian. Third person point of view. Two main characters. We got the prison guard. We got the prisoner. Person versus nature. This is person versus society, but it's also kind of predominantly nature. Nature of humans, maybe, but the nature of the swamp. Main location is swamp past. I'm hoping this at least harkens back to the original chain gangs and ones that sort of have existed not too far in the distant past and will probably exist again, given the America's need for cheap labor. They don't want to pay for it. The money people got to keep the poor poor, rich rich, and then you have the poor fight against each other to see who can be the next rich person. Welcome to Dystopia. You can get off anytime, but it's kind of hard to get off the ride. For today's stochastic fiction game story with these story elements, setting time past, setting main location swamp, conflict person versus nature, quantity of primary characters 2, point of view 3rd, tense past tense, genre dystopian, format flash fiction. At the end of this, give it a rating and be done. But let's read it aloud. This is the story called Shackled Labor. Shackled Labor. The shackle did bend pretty good after Chuck slammed it with a sledgehammer against the rail track. Sweat stung eyes as he looked around the lines of men in prison stripes slamming railroad ties along the path carved through the edge of the bayou. By the 5th hit, Chuck seen the prison guard named Lewis Pier from a distance pivot toward him. Chuck pressed against the pain of the shackle-cutting foot and ran off before he realized he left his shoe behind. Off into the swamp he splashed and waited, not caring much about and knowing the sounds of the dogs. Off into the swamp he splashed and waited, not caring much about the sound of dogs, knowing that the dogs and the chunky security guards were not wanting to get wet and stuck in mire. Chuck lost his other shoe by the mouth of the mire, sucking his feet like a catfish. Water up to his chest, he spied around the muck and found a mound around a clump of cypress trees. A gunshot fired, and the guard Lewis shouted, "Good luck, Chuck! We'll get you, or the swamp will." Chuck climbed that mound of muck and salty mud he soaked through at his bare feet. All around, trees and water spread with spots of mud rising in mounds here and there. Small ripples of fish, snakes, alligators spread. Images of big mouths and sharp teeth taking his feet inspired Chuck to cuddle into a ball. He held that ball until after a helicopter passed overhead a few times. After the noon heat passed, his sweat and swamp wet started to get cool. And the hunger, that set in. He did much miss the oatmeal and onions offered for lunch the past days. Night was fast and came fast with cold. His feet had pain, a few cuts, and Branch stabs burned a bit while Chuck figured what to do next. He'd planned to make it through the swamp out the other side, but he didn't know how or what was on the other side, so he slept there. Next, with the sun, he awoke and heard the distant hit of the railroad ties. He walked and waded deep into the swamp. One time a helicopter puttered overhead and he ducked under the roots until it passed. That was the only time he forgot about his hunger and realized he couldn't feel his feet. But he still waded deep into the swamp. The ripples he spotted shook through him. Eyes of an alligator caused him to splash and climb on the roots of a cypress tree and hold. His hunger did wait until his numb feet started pinging pain again as he slipped and rubbed and scraped them against the bark. Another day passed, thirst, more hunger into his mind. He tried to cup some salty sweat to drink, but that didn't help. Midday he drank some swat water, gagged and coughed. That cough echoed, but he heard nothing else. Seen a few water ripples, more like snakes and maybe a fish. The chill set in before he found sleep for a few hours. The loon yodels and wells called through the swamp as unseen splashes rippled through the silence of night. Chuck got some sleep sometime near morning, was able to keep asleep for some time. Noon woke him. Sweating and shivering, his mind convinced he needed to go back or deeper. He can make it, he thought. Maybe they moved along the road, and he convinced himself, and that if he waded back, that he could walk along the path laid by the dump trucks and maybe hitch a ride. The plan paid perfect. More sweat seeped from his body and the hunger numbed. He's seen it. He waded back. Him finding the road, he thought in his mind. The guards would pass after a few days, he thought. Then he asked himself, what day is it? How long's he been lost? He lost the count in his mind. Haze between shivers. The sun passed a bit. Near dusk, he believed the time was right for his escape. He splashed quiet, silencing the loons in their night calls. Sudden ripples and slapping of an alligator tail sounded around. In the dim moonlight, and waiting and thinking over and over that he'll make it and he'll be free. He thought about wanting that whiskey he tried to steal that got him stuck in the chain gang and working for pennies to make another $1 so they could buy whiskey. He thought he seen a house or something through the trees, so he thrashed and slapped through the waist-deep water, filling thorn stab. And that light never got brighter. It must have been some root that tripped him. But once his body fell and his head hit a rock, he never made it to the light. The light did get brighter and shone from a lantern held by the guard Lewis trolling through the swamp. The guard Lewis spat while pulling Chuck's dead body onto the boat. Said, well, at least we don't need to pay you for the finals day work and I get overtime. That was my knowledge of chain gangs and swamps. Made that a poor story. At the end, of course, there were more than a few mistakes that need to be corrected. So the rating of the story is probably like 2, maybe a 1. But it's a story that was at least tried to be written. I have another 40 minutes left in this time, but I need to start making the time random as well. And to be honest, thinking of dystopia for much longer is just not something I want to do right now, though I'll still do it through the rest of the day. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's call it done. As time passes and information is gained, new knowledge is had, and, well, I obviously need to go collect some new knowledge and maybe write something that's not so dystopian. I encourage y'all to try to find at least some utopian aspect of life and start to write about it. Give people some vision of what at least you think is the perfect world. And maybe you can convince others that it's true.